I want you to remember one number throughout everything I'm about to tell you. 3. 3 days. That is the entire competitive sample size from which the Cleveland Browns media ecosystem managed to construct one of the most dizzying narrative spirals I've witnessed around a single NFL roster situation in recent memory. 3 days of voluntary minicamp, helmets and shorts, no pads, no live defense, no contact of any kind, no film that any football evaluator operating with genuine professional seriousness would treat as a meaningful foundation for franchise-level decisions. And inside that 3-day window, both Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel reportedly ended up on the trade market simultaneously. Anthony Richardson was being circulated as a genuine target Cleveland should actively pursue. And certain local media voices arrived at the public position that Shedeur Sanders doesn't even deserve to hold the backup quarterback role on this roster. Not the starter, the backup. I want to take you through all of it carefully, what the narratives are actually doing, what the real football picture looks like underneath all of it, and what I genuinely believe is happening inside that building when the cameras aren't there, manufacturing the next installment of this story. Begin with the pattern that has followed Shedeur Sanders, because understanding how it has evolved over time is the only way to understand what is happening right now with any clarity. When he was moving through the pre-draft process, the critique was about the tape. Then people actually watched the tape, and that argument became difficult to sustain convincingly. So it moved. It migrated to the combine environment, to private interview concerns, to character questions that circulated with real authority in certain media spaces, but could never be named with any specificity or supported with any documented evidence. Then Shedeur spent an entire year inside the Cleveland building. He operated in a situation that was demonstrably and measurably not configured to support his development or his success. He survived it with his character completely intact. His professional reputation didn't take a single specific credible hit, despite a full year of daily proximity to a local media ecosystem that would benefit professionally from finding something damaging to attach to his name. After 12 months of that proximity, they found nothing, because there is genuinely nothing there to find. So what argument remains? Where does the narrative go after every previous angle has been exhausted without producing real evidence? Apparently it goes to his last name. That's genuinely where we've landed after all of it. A year ago, the argument was that he got drafted as high as he did because of his father's name and influence. Now, some of the same voices are arguing that he fell as far as he did because of the complications surrounding everything connected to that same name. I need you to actually stop and think about that for a moment. Both of those arguments cannot be simultaneously true. They cannot. If the Sanders name inflated his draft position, it cannot have also suppressed it. The narrative adjusted itself between those two moments to arrive at whatever conclusion was convenient at that particular time, and reasoning that works backward from a predetermined destination rather than forward from available evidence is not analysis. It is advocacy wearing the clothing of analysis. Recognizing that distinction clearly is the only way to properly understand the coverage environment that Todd Monken made the structural decision to remove from his preparation facility. He saw the pattern, he named it through his actions, and then he built a wall around it. Let me address Dillon Gabriel with the honesty this conversation almost never generates in his direction, because fairness requires it regardless of where the competitive evaluation has landed. Gabriel is a third-round draft pick. That is a real organizational capital investment, not a street free agent who costs nothing to carry. Andrew Berry has a documented history of operating as a general manager who works to extract maximum recoverable value from every asset in the building, and a third-round pick represents enough invested resources that walking away without exploring the return the market might offer doesn't align with how this front office characteristically operates. When reports indicate the Browns are still evaluating Gabriel's role and haven't completely closed the organizational door, that is not an endorsement of him as a competitive quarterback solution. It is an accurate description of how a competent front office manages a capital investment it has already made. The question of where Gabriel ultimately ends up is genuinely open. Treating it as already resolved before a single padded practice has been held is precisely the kind of premature conclusion manufacturing that has defined this entire coverage cycle from the moment minicamp began. What is not open is the direct assessment from people who actually sat and watched both quarterbacks compete in real time. Josh Cribbs played professional football at a high level. He understands what winning looks like from inside a competitive environment and has no professional stake in advocating for one player over another. He was unambiguous about what he observed. Gabriel has used whatever opportunity this building was prepared to extend to him. He is not the talent level this situation requires. Shedeur outperformed him. That is a football person speaking honestly from direct observation, not from narrative agenda. When Kordell Stewart, a quarterback who broke records at the game's highest level and understands what the position demands from the inside, arrives at the same conclusion independently and states it plainly, you are not hearing manufactured content. You are hearing legitimate football evaluation converging from separate directions on the same honest destination. The people still producing reasons to keep this competition artificially uncertain are the ones whose specific interests are served by that artificial uncertainty continuing to exist. Now let me address the Anthony Richardson trade speculation directly, because this is where the conversation moved from premature to genuinely disconnected from football reality, and it deserves a clear response rather than dismissal. The proposal being circulated is that Cleveland should move Shedeur Sanders and draft capital to Indianapolis to acquire Richardson. Think through what the resulting quarterback room would actually contain, because examining it clearly makes the proposal very difficult to defend on pure football grounds. You would have Deshaun Watson, whose physical situation carries genuine uncertainty about how many games he can sustain as a primary starter without interruption. You would have Dillon Gabriel, acknowledged widely as a player still in the very early foundational stages of professional development. And you would have Anthony Richardson, who despite possessing genuinely remarkable physical tools, has struggled with consistency, missed significant time to injury, and carries a documented history where his relationship with the full technical and psychological demands of the quarterback position has raised real questions from evaluators who watched him closely across multiple professional seasons. That is the quarterback room this trade produces. That is what moving a 5th overall pick is supposed to obtain for this franchise. Laid out with that clarity, the proposal reveals itself as something other than a football argument. The Richardson speculation also exposes something genuinely revealing about what certain corners of this media conversation are actually optimizing for. Richardson generates content. His arm talent is real and dramatic. His athleticism produces highlight moments that travel across platforms and generate immediate engagement in ways that Shedeur's more systematic, timing-based operational style doesn't replicate with the same visual immediacy. But we are supposed to be evaluating quarterbacks for their capacity to help franchises win football games consistently across sustained competitive periods, not for their ability to produce the most shareable weekly moments. When you apply that standard honestly and remove the content value filter, the case for Richardson over Sanders is nowhere near as compelling as the speculation volume implies. One player has demonstrated the competitive intelligence and operational precision that winning offenses require as their foundation. The other generates excitement every spring and real questions every October. The Pittsburgh trade scenario involving Shedeur deserves genuine engagement rather than dismissal because it presents a more nuanced picture that requires honest examination. The surface framing that Shedeur could develop quietly behind Aaron Rodgers in a lower-pressure environment while building toward a future starting opportunity has real appeal that I understand. Veteran presence with Rodgers' experience can be a genuinely valuable developmental resource for a young quarterback learning the professional game. But Pittsburgh also has Drew Aller and Will Howard on their roster, two quarterbacks their own fan base has real emotional investment in seeing developed and given meaningful opportunities. The picture of Shedeur arriving there and settling cleanly into a quiet developmental role, while two other organizational quarterback investments compete for the same attention and resources, is considerably more complicated in practice than the simplified version presents. And more fundamentally, the Cleveland Browns selected Shedeur Sanders with the 5th overall pick in an NFL draft. The organizational commitment embedded in that decision is not something a well-functioning front office responsibly dissolves through a trade driven more by external narrative fatigue than by any honest football evaluation of what this player can provide across the next decade of this franchise's existence. The Michael Penix situation adds a layer of genuine roster complexity that the current coverage is almost entirely ignoring, and it matters more than the trade speculation volume suggests. Reports indicate Penix is unlikely to be available for training camp and may not be ready to participate meaningfully until approximately week 3 of the preseason. That creates a real and practical organizational need for quarterback bodies in the building during the early stages of camp, entirely independent of what the ultimate depth chart resolution ends up looking like. Which means Gabriel potentially remaining on the roster initially serves a legitimate functional purpose that has nothing to do with any longer-term evaluation of his standing. The same reporting being cited as evidence that Gabriel is heading elsewhere can simultaneously and accurately be cited as evidence that the Browns see real operational value in having him present during the early stages of camp, when the roster needs that functional depth. Both things can coexist within a front office managing multiple competing variables across a compressed timeline. That nuance gets obliterated when the media is operating at the volume and velocity the Cleveland situation has been generating since minicamp opened its 3-day window. The conversation about importing veteran wide receiver presence to stabilize this passing game tells its own revealing story about the selective attention being applied to this roster. Those discussions unfolded almost entirely without serious examination of what Jerry Jeudy actually produced last season, specifically that he was statistically among the least effective players in the league at his position in terms of dropped footballs. He is already on this roster. He is precisely the veteran receiver presence these conversations describe as essential to organizational passing game stability. He delivered the opposite of what veteran presence is supposed to contribute. The same voices calling for imported receiver stability constructed that entire argument without accounting for the veteran receiver already in the building who represents a significant part of the very problem being described. That selective attention runs in exact parallel to the selective attention that has characterized the coverage of Shedeur's situation throughout this entire period. Highlight what builds the story you want to tell. Systematically set aside what complicates or contradicts it. Repeat until the narrative feels self-sustaining. Here is the actual football picture heading into training camp, stated as plainly as I know how to state it. Shedeur Sanders has demonstrated, in the limited and structurally compromised circumstances he has been given to operate within, that he belongs in this competition and that the coaching staff currently running this building agrees he belongs in it. Watson faces genuine physical uncertainty that any honest projection accounts for rather than sets aside strategically. Gabriel has been evaluated by multiple credible football people who watch the minicamp sessions directly and arrived at the same conclusion from independent starting points. The organizational infrastructure assembled this offseason, the offensive line investments, the specific receiver additions, the philosophical framework Monken has articulated publicly about what his offense demands and what winning football actually requires at the head coaching level, all of it points toward a specific operational style at the quarterback position. The quarterback whose game is most aligned with that specific style is the one whose name keeps appearing in trade speculation, not because the football evidence supports moving him, but because certain people in this conversation would find it considerably more convenient if he were no longer in the building providing daily evidence against the narrative they have spent substantial time and professional credibility constructing. What I genuinely believe happens when training camp opens and the evaluation resumes under real competitive conditions is not complicated. Shedeur brings the same daily preparation quality and competitive consistency that the coaches inside that building have been accumulating as genuine evaluative evidence for weeks. The preseason games provide actual competitive film that non-contact minicamp sessions simply cannot generate, and that film gets incorporated into an evaluation being conducted by a staff that arrived in Cleveland with zero organizational loyalty to any previous regime and zero motivation to protect anyone from what honest competitive evidence reveals. That evaluation has had a direction for some time. The formal announcement is the only remaining pending element. No volume of trade speculation manufactured inside a 3-day non-contact window changes what happens when real competition resumes under conditions that produce unambiguous results. What the Cleveland coverage generated this week is, whatever its specific intentions, the most complete possible justification for why Monken closed the facility doors in the first place. The available competitive evidence was genuinely limited. 3 days of non-contact work that no serious football evaluator treats as a foundation for decisions of this magnitude. The media response was to manufacture a complete trade market speculation cycle, publicly question the roster standing of a 5th overall pick on backup quarterback grounds, and produce arguments from the same voices who spent the previous year establishing precisely how they intended to approach covering this particular player when circumstances gave them the opportunity. Running the full narrative revolution before a single padded practice has been conducted is not journalism in any meaningful sense. It is content generation operating in the space where patient, evidence-based observation is supposed to live. The people conducting the actual evaluation inside that building are not on the media's timeline. They have already seen enough to understand what they have. Everything that follows is the process of confirming it under conditions where the conclusion, when it comes, cannot be credibly disputed by anyone willing to look honestly at the evidence that produced it.